Hello and welcome to this introduction to In the Round Tower at Jhansi by Christina Rossetti. Rossetti's intent in writing In the Round Tower was to portray a real-life event. As it turned out, things weren't quite as they seemed, but let's take a closer look and see what we think. In the Round Tower at Jhansi by Christina Rossetti. 100, 1,000 to 1, even so not a hope in the world remained. The swarming, howling wretches below gained and gained and gained. Skene looked at his pale young wife. Is the time come? The time is come. Young, strong, and so full of life, the agony struck them dumb. Close his arm about her now, close her cheek to his, close the pistol to her brow. God forgive them this. Will it hurt much? No, mine own. I wish I could bear the pain for both. I wish I could bear the pain alone. Courage, dear, I am not loath. Kiss and kiss. It is not pain thus to kiss and die. One kiss more, and yet one again. Goodbye, goodbye. So we're very much thrown into the middle of something in this poem, and the phrase for that, of course, is in media res. We are in the middle of a scene. And that fact, together with some structural choices, creates a real sense of drama and pace and fear in this poem. Now, if you've gone anywhere in researching this poem at all, you will have discovered that the title of this poem and the events in this poem refer to a real-life event, or what Rossetti believed to be a real-life event, in what was certainly very real, which was an Indian mutiny, or a mutiny amongst a certain division of the Indian Army against what was the British East India Company. You'll read much more about this online. I'm not going to go into the history and the particulars, but it was fairly isolated uprising that's sometimes referred to as being the first Indian mutiny. So maybe you want to search for that. Maybe you can search for this poem and find some context specific to it. But the fact that in some published versions Rossetti includes the date of that battle or of that mutiny in the title of the poem really cements the fact that she's intending this to be a real-life account. Now, those who know a little Tennyson will perhaps have been reminded by certain structural choices of the great famous poem Charge of the Light Brigade by Tennyson, which shares some rhythmic cadence and structural decisions or choices with this poem. Let's have a look and see what we can see. In media res means that we're thrown into a situation where there are huge numbers of the enemy advancing. 100, 1,000 to 1. There's a note of kind of exaggeration here, or the drama of hyperbole, which gives us a sense of peril. 100, 1,000 to 1, even so not a hope in the world remained. And you can hear that slightly Charge of the Light Brigade galloping rhythm here. We've got alternating tetrameter and trimeter with lots of anapests, the anapest being the two unstressed syllables before the stressed one, which gives it a ba-ba-bum, ba-bum, 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 a kind of onwards kind of cadence or meter, which I think lends itself perfectly to a story in which there is an approaching enemy. Because, of course, the focus of this poem, despite the hundreds and thousands of people all around, is very much centred on two characters. We are very closely focused on them, despite the chaos that is just out of shot or just out of the corner of our eye. Our focus is very much on them. The tension is created not by everything that's going on in the background, but in the rhythms and the meter of the verse. The swarming, howling wretches below gained and gained and gained. And here we have another technique to create that build-up of excitement, if you like, though the repetition of gained. You also notice in a sort of post-colonial reading the dehumanization of the Indian sepoy soldiers who, depending on your reading of those events now, there were some very reasonable causes for rebellion in those circumstances, and yet Rossetti here is very much describing those Indian soldiers as in animal terms. This was obviously quite a common thing during empire, to dehumanise the subjects that were essentially being kind of chattels or almost slaves in that machine. To dehumanise them enables that awful treatment to take place. We see echoes of it in the news at the moment. Gained and gained and gained. They're getting closer and closer and closer. Then we zoom in on the two main characters of the poem, one of whom is named. Perhaps significantly, the husband in this married couple is named, and he's Captain Alexander Skene. He's a real character. He's a soldier that was killed in this mutiny. Now, there's a sense with the two figures focused upon, the crowded, howling wretches around the periphery, that there's something of a siege going on here. It's like they're being besieged, and that's deliberate, because in the round tower at Jhansi is a moment of siege in a battle. Now, it's been painted a number of times, and it's not always painted that Skene and his wife are in a tower with the kind of howling wretches gathering below. Sometimes they're painted out in the open with the battle all around them. But the detail of what happened and what happened exactly to Skene and his wife was not known to Rossetti at the time that she's writing this. So she's writing it with a definite eye on its power as a piece of propaganda, I think. She's very much of her time writing this poem. The dehumanisation of those Indian soldiers is testament to that. And also the way in which Skene and his wife are treated, very much on this kind of pedestal of civilization amongst this howling mass of enemy. So here's Skene looking at his pale young wife. Is the time come? The time is come. And we have an example of Rossetti employing dialogue to create immediacy and connection with these characters. It's often noted in analysis that it's sometimes quite hard to tell who's saying what in this dialogue. If you pay very careful attention to the punctuation, you can almost guarantee that you know who's speaking. And plus, with our kind of feminist lens, we can anticipate perhaps who's taking what kind of role in this scenario. But let's have a look at this conversation and see if we can work out who's saying what. Skene looked at his pale young wife. Is the time come? The time is come. So one of them is asking, is this it? And the other is saying, this is it. Now, our sort of understanding of the gender dynamics in this period would suggest that it might be Skene's wife who's asking, has the time come? And it's the man's role to assert that, yes, this is the time. Then some description. Young, strong, and so full of life, the agony struck them dumb. We've got the same metre in verse 2. In fact, we've got the same metre throughout. That kind of inexorable. Inexorable. If I've spelled that wrong, I shall correct it in the description below. Inexorable means something that cannot be stopped. There's also a note of inevitability about that cadence. Rossetti uses lots of kind of naturalistic punctuation amongst the dialogue in this poem to create the slightly breathless, on the edge of panic caesura of what's happening, the speed of it all, the tension of it all is conveyed, I think, quite effectively with these kind of breaks and starts and pauses and caesuras. The agony struck them dumb, obviously very emotive use of the word agony, the agony of fear, the agony of the circumstances that they're in. Then we have the second example of a series of repetitions, this anaphora of close his arm about her now, close her cheek to his, close the pistol, and these are trochees again. We've seen this technique quite recently, the repeated word at the start of a line emphasising the first syllable in that trochee technique. Close his arm about her now, close her cheek to his, close the pistol to her brow. You can hear the galloping. God forgive them this. The emphasis on the word close here brings, I think, the focus in really, really tight on them. We are really, really close in an intimate moment in the crisis of this young couple's life. We've also got the anaphora here emphasising this horrible juxtaposition between the soft cheek and the cold, hard pistol. That pistol's got no place next to that cheek or within his arm. The protective arm of Skene here, perhaps significantly for that gender dynamic. God forgive them this. Now, the God forgive them is obviously a direct reference to the Christian sin of suicide. This is, of course, where we get the collocation of committing suicide, the idea that it was a sin against God. There's a movement away from that terminology now to emphasise the tragedy of suicide rather than the sin that's committed. But certainly for Rossetti in her time, that what they were about to do, which was to end it all before they were captured, was something that God would need to forgive. And the suggestion, I think you might agree, that the tone of this poem is that, don't worry, God will forgive them, because what they're doing is so brave and kind of heroic. And I think that's the note of patriotism, of propaganda almost in this poem. The idea that these two, they're going to make the ultimate sacrifice. They're going to take this terrible decision so that they don't fall into the hands of this howling mob. Will it hurt much? Now we're maybe in stanza 4 repeating the question in stanza 2 such that we believe this to be the wife's voice. Will it hurt much? No, mine own, I wish I could bear the pain for both. So again, this is the traditional male role in that Victorian marriage model where he wishes he could bear the pain of the wife on her behalf. His strong arms around her, he's reassuring her, it's his pistol, he's the one that's choosing when the time has come, he's the soldier, he's the man of action, with his strong arm to protect his pale young wife. I think you'll agree that does bear scrutiny, that interpretation, the idea this is the wife asking, will it hurt much? So there's awful kind of almost childlike innocence of that question in this moment. Is this going to hurt? Okay, so we're thinking this is the wife speaking, the wife's words. No, mine own, I wish I could bear the pain for both. So a little bit of sort of tender possessiveness in his language there. I wish I could bear the pain for both. Now, significantly, Rossetti then gives some lines to his wife. Now, no one knows what they actually said, and as we'll find out later, this didn't really happen. So no one knows what she said. Rossetti's giving her this line, which is interesting. I wish I could bear the pain alone. And then she offers him courage. Courage, dear, I'm not loath, which means I'm not afraid, I'm not unwilling to do what needs to be done. So in the midst of all this traditional gender dynamic, the young, pale wife of Captain Skene is offering him strength or encouraging him courage. I wish I could bear this pain alone. She's acknowledging that she needs him there with her. They're a couple in this, they're facing it together. But she offers him courage. There's a strength there that is not a surprise to us, knowing what we know about Rossetti and the way she felt about women and their role in the world. And I think just even in this very traditional or apparently traditional strong arm of the man type scenario, we've got a strong female voice here too. And then they kiss and kiss. Then more dialogue. It is not pain thus to kiss and die. One kiss more. Lots of repetition of kiss. 4 lots of kisses, and we have that real intimacy in the tight focus on what's happening between the two of them. Again, what's happening outside or downstairs or coming over the hill is shut out in the intimacy of this depiction that Rossetti achieves with the repetition, with the imagery, with the dialogue. And yet, they want to prolong the moment. It's a little bit like, Romeo and Juliet. One last kiss, one last kiss, one last kiss. And then goodbye, and we get the dramatic caesuras all over the place to emphasise the breathlessness of this moment, the desperate kind of last passion of those kisses. So it's a poem of high drama. It's a poem that reflects a real person or a real event in a wider sense, such as we had in Sir Louise, where we had the mistress of Louis XIV immortalised in that poem. Here we've got a young captain in an Indian mutiny in 1857. Now, as you'll know from your reading, and as I mentioned earlier, it soon became clear that this version of events wasn't what actually happened, and that in fact, tragically, the young couple were captured and killed in captivity. And of course, as you'll know, Rossetti then writes a footnote to her poem to acknowledge that with the facts that she had at the time of writing, this was the poem that she created. But since writing, she's since found out that this wasn't quite what had happened. And you must look it up and read her words there as she acknowledges what actually happened. But It's a poem in that ABAB kind of ballady oral tradition, very rhythmic, very easy to remember. If you're adding to your list of Rossetti poems that you've committed to memory, this one's very easy to remember because of that galloping rhythm, with the anapests adding even more pace, even more beats, unstressed syllables to the tetrameter and the trimeter. Well, with which poems can this be compared? The subject matter is like nothing else. We've got a poem that includes dialogue, so perhaps you can find poetry to compare it with that uses dialogue. There's definitely a rhythm being employed for a dramatic effect that we've seen before. There's regularity in metre and rhyme scheme, with trochees and anapests being added for dynamics. We've seen that before. And we've got this real event and what Rossetti believed to be a particular situation in that event being portrayed for us, much like Tennyson and the Charge of the Light Brigade a few years before. In the Round Tower at Jhansi. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.